is Shokitable Media, and I approve this message.
I think for Plateau, it has become one of Nigeria's largest killing fields. Year in, year out, we hear of such gruesome attacks that will claim the lives of hundreds. And it appears as though the people are helpless, they are hopeless, and the government even appear even more helpless and hopeless too, because for the Chief of Defense Staff to be telling citizens to take charge of their own security, honestly, I don't know what that means. These killings cannot continue, and we do not seem to have a solution to this problem. The current administration do not seem to have taken the right steps towards rejigging what we usually call the national security architecture in order to contain some of these issues. For a country like Nigeria that is experiencing one of its worst economic downturns in living memory, if you have this sustained, heightened insecurity, it means Nigeria is on the verge of state failure, where government can no longer meet up with its basic responsibilities of providing welfare and security for citizens. And so one would expect that all hands should be on deck at this point in time to revamp both the security architecture, to protect lives and property, and of course, scale up the economy that is on a free fall. So this is very sad, and I think beyond the platitudes of condemnation and expressing sadness, we need to begin to apply practical solutions to this problem. And there's something I've always canvassed for, that the solution to Nigeria's problem of heightened insecurity will be more bullets and less prayers. And if you want to go by the admonition by the Chief of Defense Staff, telling us to now take charge of our own security, I think it is actually high time, because the armed forces are overstretched, poorly funded, understaffed, and can no longer contain the situation. For a country that is as large as Nigeria, 200 million people, with a landmass of over 900,000 square kilometers, you don't expect an understaffed, underfunded, underpaid, poorly motivated armed forces that is less than 300,000 in staff in terms of strength to be able to contain this insecurity. So I think that there's something that we need to do now, and that thing is this. A number of states have formed vigilante groups across the country. Started with Amotekun in the southwest. We now see states in the northwest forming vigilante groups. The governor of Kaduna also, hired the number of youth in thousands. But these vigilante groups have remained prostrate and cannot actually carry out the mandate because they do not have the right caliber of arms and ammunition to defend their communities. And this is why I've said, look, part of the measures that could be taken now in the immediate, is to incorporate state government-funded vigilante groups into the civil defense. A volunteer corps, needs to be created at this point in the civil defense. But this corps will be staffed by vigilante groups that will be drawn from a broad section of the state. So there's not
just before you continue.
Yes.
Isn't that a very strong argument in favor of reforms in the policing system across Nigeria? Because it will seem that, from what you said, the police and the armed forces are overstretched at this point.
Yes.
But it seems to be an argument in favor of local policing.
Well, the thing is, we have insurgency. A policing system cannot contain insurgency. It can only prevent it from happening by enforcement of law and order. But we have a situation such as we have now, where the policing system was inadequate, and so it has allowed for the escalation of what you have as internal insurrection and insurgency. Policing alone cannot contain it. So you need to first have a counter-insurgency force that is actually driven by the members of the community that are affected. And then this is the standard practice all over the world. You do counter-insurgency with the people at the front of it. In fact, the Nigerian Civil War was actually fought with volunteer units in the Nigerian Army that were made up of vigilante groups and volunteers from the local communities, particularly in the Niger Delta, that supported the 3rd Marine Commando to overrun the Biafra forces in some of those parts of the country. So we are saying at this point, why the reforms continue, why the reforms are very essential and necessary, in the immediate, to stop this hemorrhaging, to stop this waste of lives, to stop these senseless killings. We need to empower members of the community to have the defense capabilities, to serve as first responders when attacks like this come. Because you can't have the armed forces in the current number and capability they have everywhere at the same time. Especially we have a porous border and have a proliferation of armed groups across the country. So we need to create that volunteer corps in the civil defense. I've said this for more than a year now, that when you create this volunteer corps, you incorporate these people, these vigilante groups, including the civilian JTF in the Northeast, including the vigilante groups across the Northwest, into this volunteer corps. Now, the reason for that is for purpose of control and management. They are under the federal government. But the state government bears the responsibility of funding them, paying their salaries and remunerations, and providing monies or funding for ammunition and mobility of these groups. It's very important at this point.
What about non-kinetic, measures? Because, the argument here is that we should look at kinetic and non-kinetic measures. Last week, you applauded Kaduna State government. This week, we're seeing Zaria as well. Shiites worship with Christians in Zaria, advocate unity. So, beyond, arms and ammunition availability, what about the sense of the psychology of the terror on the citizens?
I think the most potent non-kinetic approach to national security is good governance, comprehensive good governance, which incorporates adequate provision of welfare and security for citizens on one hand, but administering the state with the principles of equity, fairness, justice, and inclusion to all without prejudice or discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, religion, or region of origin. This is the most comprehensive non-kinetic approach to solving this problem, because it was also the absence of all of this that also resulted partly into this situation we are facing today. Good governance. People must have hope in themselves, must have hope and faith in the state, and the political leaders must ensure this. But in the immediate, to stop this hemorrhaging, because now that Nigeria is like a country at war with itself, the state government can no longer sit down as lame dogs and just condemn and call for arrest of assailants. We must now have a defense mechanism that puts the people at the front, at the head of their own defense as first responders. And the longer we delay this measure, the more lives are going to lose. And by the time we implement such measures, it's going to deter armed groups who now know that, look, if you attack a community, there is a high chance that you're not going to return with your life. That will begin to mitigate against this frequent attack, because it's like a free rein for them. They just enter communities that are defenseless, unarmed, and they just carry out these atrocities. But when there is stiff resistance, at least the communities can hold fire, can hold them to combat before conventional forces come. But talking about reforms again, sometimes when we wonder why we have such levels of insecurity in Nigeria, you know that as a Nigerian, you don't need to have too much of power of clairvoyance to know why. Talking about reforms, you must start with the welfare of those that are carrying arms to protect the state. If you cannot provide monetary and financial security for them in terms of adequate remuneration, proper housing, and all other perks that should come with such risky jobs, you can't also expect them to secure your lives and properties. Let me say this. It might interest you to know that the pay grade of Nigerian armed forces is one of the lowest in the world. It's shameful. It's heartbreaking to know that a corporal in the Nigerian Army earns just about 58,000 naira per month as salary. That is less than $50 per month.
That's about $40.
Yes. It might interest you to know, for example, that the lowest cadre in the U.S. Army, what we call the private in the U.S. Army, the salary of a private soldier in the U.S. Army, at point of entry, is about $23,000 per annum. That salary, fellow Nigerians, is higher than the salary of a four-star general in Nigerian Army. It's about twice the salary of a four-star general in Nigerian Army. That is, the salary of your chief of defense staff is less than the salary of a private soldier in the U.S. Army.
That's astounding.
And that is why, for example, you begin to wonder, why was it possible for the U.S. to track down the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and get him eliminated, and do something for the leader of ISIS, Abdmajeed, and get him eliminated? And the Nigerian armed forces, for 12 years, could not track down and kill Abubakar Shekau, the leader of Boko Haram, until a factional group, a splinter group, helped us to do the job. So when we talk about reforms, it must start with the welfare of soldiers, welfare of police officers. They are aging slave wage. And I think our political leaders must begin to wake up. This is a ticking time bomb. We can't continue to subject people that are carrying arms to protect the state to this level of misery. And you expect everything to be all right. I mean, they derive pleasure in carrying these officers and policemen around as a show of privilege and status. And they put it on social media. It's like our political leaders now have developed the act of competing with celebrities over the use of social media to display affluence, opulence,
and lifestyle.
Exactly. So this is something that we must look into. Why is the U.S. able to provide adequate welfare security for their own men, who in turn are providing security for the state? It is because the salary of the U.S. president is $400,000 per annum, consolidated. No more, no less. The U.S. government does not pay for his food or his wardrobe. If he organizes a party in the White House, he pays for it.
He pays for it, yeah.
He pays for his groceries every month. The only thing the government pays for, state banquet, very modest. That's why they have enough to give back to the people. But look at the case in Nigeria. Nigeria's political leadership is like that irresponsible father who drives around in a Mercedes-Benz and his children are walking barefoot with torn clothes to the nearest public school that is poorly funded and is meant for just the dress of the society. That is the situation in Nigeria. So when we begin to ask questions about why do we have such situations, the questions are not far-fetched. It's there for all of us to see.
Okay, let's go on to this headline in the Leadership newspaper, which talks about something similar to what you're talking about. Palliatives can't solve Nigeria's problem.
Definitely not.
Bishop Kuka, that's quoting Bishop Kuka. That's on page 10 of the Leadership newspaper this morning. Now, talking about palliatives, do you agree with him? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. Palliatives cannot substitute for energy security. This is an argument we've had on this program for a long time, when we were cautioning against the proposition to remove subsidy from petrol. And we said, no, it will create the effect you're having now, and it's going to get worse. Because you can never substitute energy security in an economy with palliatives. And you're talking about palliatives that are not even going around everybody that needs palliatives. So it was a wrong political economic calculation to have imagined, for example, that when you float the exchange rate and then you remove subsidies on petrol, that is going to sort of create a new economic order that will usher in prosperity and development. It was flawed. And we argued that there's no country in the world that is worth its salt. There's no developed part of the hemisphere in the world today without energy policies that provide some sort of subsidy. Because, you see, energy security is a matter of state security, it's a matter of national security. And one of the components of energy security is affordability. So that affordability component makes it imperative for governments across the world to intervene through subsidies in critical energy products and services that are vital to the economy. So if you go to Europe, for example, electricity plays a very huge role in their productive economy. So you have subsidies in place for electric power, to power industries and homes. Germany was going to spend about 93 billion euro for electricity subsidy in 2023 alone, for example. And the same story across the world. China spends billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize fossil fuel and all range of energy products because of productivity. So subsidy payment on petrol, which was Nigeria's most important energy product, because it drives the bulk of SMEs in Nigeria, it powers our logistics, was actually investment in productivity. It's a responsibility of government. Any argument against subsidy is flawed, as we have seen, and there's no way out of it. The reason is simple. Energy is like the air that human beings breathe in. That is, and what energy is to the economy is like what air is to living things.
Oxygen.
Oxygen. And that's why God, in his infinite mercy, created us and didn't put the burden on us to pay for oxygen as human beings. Otherwise, we will not live as long as we live as human beings. And that's why if people that now need to, breathe with the aid of respiratory facilities, you understand why God gave us energy, air, free of charge. So a human being can live for a long time by just breathing air without eating food. But no matter what you eat, if you don't breathe for a few minutes or you are gone.
Oxygen is
that is what energy is to the economy. Once energy becomes unaffordable, as it is in Nigeria, Once it goes beyond affordability threshold, it will destroy the economy, it will tank it, it will create inflation, it will create unemployment, it will not cascade into social unrest and high rate of crime. And that's why energy security must be prioritized as a matter of state security.
And perhaps this also explains, I mean, Blueprint says Naira scarcity cut short Christmas joy as bank closes for 2 days. A lot of people were unable to access, money in the last 3 days.
People don't understand why there is Naira scarcity. This is a different scenario from what we had under the Emefiele era, where it was a deliberate policy to restrict the issuance of Naira notes and getting us to use non-cash methods for transaction. The reason for this cash scarcity now is inflation. It's inflation. More cash, more quantity of notes, Naira notes, that have depreciated in value against the dollar are now required to transact. And the volume of cash that is still in place now is what was in place when the situation was markedly different from
it's
this.
Actually a value problem.
It's a value problem. So what you need to do is to print more currencies to meet up with the inflationary trend as it stands. Sometimes our economists don't sort of think ahead or practically until situations confront us like this. It's common sense. You don't need anybody to tell you that the quantity of Naira that has been printed, as I said, January this year, can no longer carry the inflationary weight on the local currency in view of, one, depreciation and high cost of production, which has also led to high cost of goods and services. So this is the primary cause of the current scarcity, is inflation. And that tells you that Nigeria's inflationary trend is serious. It is so serious that we now require more cash to transact, leaving very little to be taken to the banks, because you need this money to survive. So government needs to print more, but that in itself is symptomatic of a deep-seated problem, where you are printing more cash to contain inflation, and there's no hope in sight. Because this question is tied to the first one we discussed. Without energy security at all,
there can't be production.
There can't be production, and inflation will keep rising. Nigeria will keep importing, and the importation of goods and services to Nigeria, because of lack of local capacity to produce and rising for high cost of production, we keep pushing the Naira down against the dollar. So you see, the twin policies of subsidy removal on petrol and the floating of the Naira is what has led us here. And you cannot solve that problem by palliatives. The solution is to reverse these policies and revert to status quo. People keep questioning the fact that, how can you restore subsidy? I'm saying it is the standard thing to do. Restore subsidy on petrol now and reverse this floating of the Naira now. And what is the hard decision that government needs to take? The hard decision was not to remove subsidy on petrol or float the Naira. That is the easiest thing to do. It's an application of responsibility. The hard decision now is to cut corruption.
Exactly.
And that is to take the decision at the level of political leadership to commit class suicide, to say, look, enough is enough. Let us stop taking Naira from the votes through fraudulent procurement processes and going to Zone 4 to change to dollars as a store of value that we're going to use to buy delegates in the next round of election. Let them stop it now. If the political leadership stops this and decides, take that deliberate decision to stop being corrupt, cut waste, and adhere strictly to the Constitution of Nigeria, half our problem would have been solved. That is the hard decision that needs to be taken. Not the empowerment of Nigerians through subsidy removal. When the United States of America, the headquarters of capitalism, has subsidy in place, not just for energy products, but for food, for education, for housing. So who are we actually copying by doing this to ourselves?
You know, it's quite sad, because just about 2 days ago, even some embassies have decided to move their consulates to Ghana because they feel that there is a lot of racketeering through visa processing, and they do not even trust the Nigerian process to be able to do that. But corruption, you know, we've been talking about corruption for so long, Majid. How do we begin to look at that, not just from the leadership, but even those who are the followers that embolden such acts? You talked about the social media, but people also forget that kidnappers and people also look at the lifestyle of people on social media to find targets, you know, for their activities. So how do we take it back as a collective drive and not just on the politicians?
The truth is, it's called leadership by example. People are the way they are today because those in government, those that are leaders, have set a bad example on how not to be good citizens. Nigeria is one country where honesty does not pay, where integrity does not take you far. where the more you are hawkish, the more you are adept at state capture, the more political mileage you get. Such is the kind of system we operate today, where people are rewarded, where corrupt people are rewarded with some of the highest offices in the land. So that is the kind of system we operate. So why should anybody now sit and die in penury trying to be a good citizen? Any country, go and study the history of most developed countries today. It was leadership by example. Singapore had Lee Kuan Yew. Saudi Arabia had Ibn Saud. The United States of America, beginning with George Washington, had a succession of leaders that kept praising the bar of leadership up until this point in time. And so it is the story across the world. Leadership must take the lead to be able to reward good behavior and punish and sanction bad behavior. But when you reward bad behavior as a system, and you actually punish or ostracize good behavior, people will simply adapt to what will make them survive the situation. That is what you have in Nigeria. So it still boils down to leadership. It's a leadership problem, essentially, because God has placed leadership in such a vantage position that it can influence good and it can discourage bad. But when leadership now influences bad behavior and rewards it, so how are you going to now explain people that have chosen to remain good and die in penury? That's the situation in Nigeria, and it is sad. But what I'm saying is no longer sustainable. Nigeria is inching towards a failed state that might eventually collapse because of this current system. And there comes a time in the life of every nation when leaders sit down and say, okay, we've had enough. We've had our fill from the common till.
But
can we now begin to do the right things?
I'm sorry, I must interrupt you. This is a critical question. The political class, are they willing to do what you've just described?
Well,
because it sounds like you're asking them to commit class suicide.
It is their interest. It is in the interest of their own self-preservation to do that now, because Nigeria can no longer sustain their profligacy. Otherwise, if they continue on this path, they will become victims of the seeds of destruction they are sowing through bad leadership. We're getting to that point. So as analysts, we're like ancient prophets that are warning kings to say, look, doom and destruction is coming because of your iniquity. So the iniquity of our leaders today is going to bring destruction upon us that will consume them first, probably. I don't know why they are not saying it, because they're actually behaving like drunken sailors aboard a sinking ship. So they do not understand that the ship is sinking. The ship is sinking. And the question is this: for how long will those on board watch their drunken sailors allow their ships to sink without taking
control of the ship themselves?
Exactly.
Okay,
So they should be aware of that.
just before we go, because we must go in a few, like 2 minutes now, I'd like you to talk about the Rivers situation, the announcement by...
The broadcast.
Yes, the broadcast by the governor, Sim Fubara, that the peace pact is not a death sentence, and that he's willing to implement it fully.
So I think we should stop crying more than they believe. Yes. I have argued severally that we've seen a degeneration, steady degeneration of our political process since 1999 into what you can describe as a criminal franchise across party lines for power grab for self-service. And nobody is innocent in this act. So in the Rivers crisis, there are no villains, there are no heroes. They all belong to the same class. And so Fubara is not an innocent man, neither is he a hero of this crisis. And he has time without number proven that. He went into the villa on his own volition, signed an agreement. All hell was let loose. He was under pressure, he was this, he was that. Okay, he kept quiet.
Stayed calm.
He has come out to tell you now that I'm doing this, and it's not a death sentence. So we want to see everybody that has been on this, on war path with Wiki, to please shit their straw, because the person concerned has told you, I am willing to do this.
And Wiki has said, stay away from a fight that you know nothing about.
So
Yeah,
we
he's
need to
told
heed-
the elders.
Yeah.
We need to
Elders.
heed to that advice by Wiki, and the media should begin to caution these people to say, we cannot be used as a cannon fodder in a war that we don't have a stake in. You can't come to the media and overheat it all through the week. And the man you are fighting for keeps throwing you under the bus. This is the second time he's doing this. So let us leave him alone with his godfather so that they can sort themselves out. Why the Rivers people should begin to look and organize themselves outside of this establishment that has held that state down since 1999. So they need to begin to plan to elect and enthrone a new set of political leadership that is sane, that will not have this kind of entanglement. If they think
Without
Fubara
allegiance.
is the Messiah, no, I think they are missing the point. They should organize towards the next election to say, look, as leaders, as influential leaders, we want to rescue this state from this cohort of political gladiators, hawks and valiants, and elect an innocent leadership that will utilize the resources of the state for the people in its entirety.
All right. We have to leave it at that. Thank you very much. Abdmajeed Dahiru, thank you for coming.